So today we are joined by Nick Littlehales, a sports sleep coach, one of the UK's former, or even worldwide, I reckon, experts on sleep. So Nick, thank you for taking your time and welcome on the Human 24 podcast.
It's my pleasure, Phil. My pleasure, Phil. Let's hope we have a good chat.
Yeah. So obviously the topic of sleep, huge, enormous. People have talked about it for years. Kind of, it's been one of those topics where I think people sort of talk about it and then not do a great deal about it and don't really act on things. Obviously, you've dealt with elite sport in sort of many different fields. I'm sure you can expand on who you've worked with. So obviously you're looking at performance at its high end and looking at, how do you get the best, wring that last kind of 5% out of an elite level athlete and get them to recover better and perform better on the day and make sure everything's in check for them to do what they do optimally. But, obviously now we're looking at the general population and we're talking about, the general day-to-day person who's maybe struggling with their sleep, who's not getting enough or what is enough. And there's so many numbers banding around. There's so much stuff about recovery, so much stuff about sleep. And rather than us sort of speculate with them, what's commercial numbers as to, you should get 8 hours sleep or whatever it might be, we thought we'll dig into the mind of someone who knows. So I'll leave it to you.
Well, I sort of fell into the sleep industry, to say. It wasn't by choice. It was simply by circumstances, bringing up a young family and everything else. And along my little journey, I was able to get to become a sales and marketing director for a large, comfort group company called Slumberland in the UK. I collaborated with a few other partners in the industry to create the first sleep council, because there wasn't one, and I was chairman of that for a while. And I'd travel around the world because the company had licensee partners all over the world, and researched and studied sleep. We did some clinical studies. So while I wasn't academic or clinical in that particular area, I certainly listened and learned. And on a number of occasions, I worked alongside some professors of sleep. So I gathered a lot of knowledge. What always fascinated me was that as far as the health pillar is concerned, there's just no education and no, parents don't pass it on to kids. Even the academics in the clinical world of sleep had no definitive approach. So it was taken for granted, not a performance criteria. You just wake up in the morning, however well or not you've slept, and crack on until there's only so many hours left. I was always fascinated by the sort of general terms of advice, which would be get your 8 hours, have a consistent sleep time, a consistent wake time. If you don't get 8 hours, you're going to die and fail. Don't eat too late. Have your bedroom at 16 to 18 degrees. And I'm just thinking, how many people, including myself, have I ever met who does that, never mind in a week, never mind 365.
Yeah.
Then you started putting into, different types of occupations. You look at human beings who live and sleep on this planet all over it. And there's no consistency to that because the human's always adapting. So I just thought, a bit of midlife crisis in my 40s, and thought, I'm going to get out of this because you don't seem to have any impact on it. And I just fell into the world of sport. And whilst they were sleepers like everybody else, it just so happened that you could think about recovery rather than sleep. And along the sort of last 2 decades, because I sort of kicked into that in the late 90s, which seems a hell of a long time ago now, and the paradigm shift in behavior in 24/7 is almost unrecognizable in those 2 decades. And along that route, I just got involved with different types of organizations, from football to cricket, to rugby, to cycling, to all sorts of things. And it was kind of bringing things together of whether I could create a redefined approach to it. So not making things up, but taking some of the things that I'd learned and put them together in a way that maybe a young athlete, a young player, or a coach could actually use that to help an individual optimize the way that they recover. So try to, sleep's taken for granted. Well, let's not talk about sleep because the perception's already there, It's things like napping. And you think, well, the perception's already there with that. There's this 8 hours. Well, you know, I just went to the library and had a look in some books and realized that human beings, up until the electric light bulb came along, which is not that long ago, Edison time, never even tried to sleep in a monophasic one block at night. They were so much more aligned with the circadian rhythms, which is nothing more than the sun going around the planet, a couple of hormones called melatonin and serotonin, which is produced by blue light, daylight, diminished light and dark. And that's how the world works. And it sort of started to intrigue me that rather than, you know, take all the basic elements of it, but just redefine it in a slightly different way so people could understand it and get engaged with it and start to think about it. And I think over the, certainly over probably the last decade, we've seen schedules, 24/7 behavioral changes, never mind in the last sort of 18 months, that really put elite athletes in that sense under pressures that we've never had before. And so it's very easy to fall into a sort of trying to solve it out yourself randomly with isolated interventions. And as you pointed it out, you know, there's everything at the end of our fingertips now. So you started to see that the pressures were getting greater. We have this monophasic approach that doesn't work in today's world and probably didn't work anyway. The perception of not sleeping well and the anxiety and stress that creates, but it doesn't stop you doing what you do. Yeah. That's a problem. And so we saw sleeping tablets, all sorts of things, caffeine supplements, all sorts of things coming into the marketplace and being able to access it very easily without any medical supervision. And so I think what we're trying to do is to stop this sort of, I'll try and make it up myself, is actually give people a technique and a definitive approach that they can take on board as a framework and build their, you know, their human recovery program around all their mental and physical activity. And the biggest thing is worrying is the biggest disruptor for sleep, at whatever level that might be. And taking away the worry, because it's a very natural process, is the key to success. So it's not just about, you know, in elite sports with Olympic athletes, rowers, cyclists, professional mountaineers, NFL, NBA, NHL. It's like all across the world, is that in theory, basically, we're only just touching the surface within those organizations. But in the last few years, sleep has become this sort of, it's being blamed for almost everything. You know, and I think that's what we tend to do, is sort of, because we've not gone into it like exercise and nutrition and tracking and all that sort of stuff, and the knowledge and everything else is there to feed off, is that we sort of go, well, sleep's, we can blame sleep for this, we can blame sleep for that, we can blame sleep for this. And of course, it's a massive market because everybody sleeps and it takes up 30% of your day, which we're doing nothing. So wow, you know, devices, trackers, supplements, everything starts piling in, trying to get your dollars off you. And I think it's sort of, you just got to step back and say, the first thing you need to do is to get a better understanding of how this works. And once you've done that, that's your greatest first step before you start thinking about any other types of interventions. And it applies to everybody on this planet. It doesn't matter who you are. If you are a human being and you're on this planet, then you need to redefine your approach to sleep, because it's a game changer. It's proven. Anybody who's sort of late 20s and above just wish they'd known this when they were back in their adolescent years or even earlier. And I think that's why it's been so successful, Phil, is that it's not trying to tell you what to do. Yeah. It's not giving you fixed routines. It's not asking you to invest. It's just something that you should have known about, your parents should have known about, and they should have impacted it on you from the day you were born. And it would have enabled you to be You know, in a lot of respects in elite sport, you've got a lot of elite athletes there. They're all at the top of their game, but somebody just goes a little bit quicker. It could be the thickness of a shirt or a tire on a bike or a thousandth of a second on a Formula One racetrack. Or it could be just you walk past the partner for your life and you didn't notice it. Or you made a decision that could have had a bit more of a reflective thing, or you pushed it too hard in a certain way. So that's, in elite sport, it is all about performance. But in everybody's lives, you know, it can make such a difference. It's a long answer to the question, but you know, it's been a fascinating journey for me because I've been basically on my own, with nobody to gauge against.
Yeah.
But now it's a bit more significant, and I hope, you know, I hope the next generation, everybody is involved, with the likes of you, and all the rest of the people like you around the world, can maybe redefine it again for the next generation, because we certainly need it.
I mean, this is the thing, you know, it's like a lot of things in that kind of field when we're talking about human performance, and we talk about human performance in this slightly different narrative to, you know, the instant you mention it, people think, oh, elite sports, people in sports, people doing these. And we have this thing about elite sport where we kind of bracket a performance, whatever it might be, right? You might have a race, you might have a, you know, you might have a game, you might have whatever it might be. And people go, right, it's about what you do before and after this game or this situation. Whereas we're going, look, really that game is every day. You wake up in the morning and you go to bed at night. And that 24 hours in which you're awake and also asleep is that is your performance, right? And how do we frame that? And part of that framing is the sleep aspect. That how do we get a restful night's sleep? How do we get an effective night's sleep? You know, how long do we sleep for? When do we go to sleep? You know, what's and again, you talk about these generalized rules, right? And it's, you know, on one hand, you've got people saying, well, you should wake up to natural daylight, but then people don't, right? You know, they go to bed. We go to bed at bizarre times. And then what happens in winter? Do people change their work patterns and blah, blah, blah? And obviously modern life has a lot to, you know, almost has a lot to, you know, be responsible for. But how do we manipulate that? And how do we utilize the tools that we've got to create this better night's sleep, this more restful, this more recovery, and all these things that have only been kind of talked about, even briefly, really. I mean, you were saying about sort of 20 years ago when people started to embrace this in elite sport. I mean, hell, that was probably 3 decades too late, right? It was, you know, people were talking about, you know, all these bizarre techniques and ways of getting that little edge that you get over somebody else, you know, and they were messing with fabrics. I mean, there was all this stuff about the swimming fabrics and blah, blah, blah. There's all this stuff about performance. And obviously I was on the S&C side. So we were all about, you know, how do you prevent an athlete getting, you know, how do you keep them on the field of play, firstly, primarily? That was your goal all the time. You know, it was like, look, you've got somebody at elite level sport. They got to elite level sport, so they're strong enough, they're fast enough, they're all these different things. If you can make them a little bit faster, that's a bonus. But the idea is you prevent them getting injured. So recovery was always this massive narrative. And I remember spending some time at one of the big, you know, what was Athletes Performance, Exos in Florida. And they had this huge component of what they did was about recovery. But then I went away from it and I'm like, they didn't talk once about sleep. They didn't talk about these people going home and being restful. And you said about, you know, clearing their mind and, you know, being worried about whatever it might be. And obviously when people start to talk about sleep, the problem is you put yourself in a predicament, right? Is if you think you got bad sleep, you go to bed thinking I've got bad sleep, I'm worried about not getting enough sleep, and you lie there worrying about the fact you're not getting any sleep. So it's tricky, isn't it? And obviously I'm guessing that in this journey of yours, I guess you've dug into a lot of sort of psychology and a lot of, you know, how do people manage this and what do people do to get rid of it? How do you stop people worrying about not getting enough sleep? How do you do that?
Yeah, it's I think the first thing that you do is just simply by some simple steps of education and awareness, you can open their eyes up to the fact that you know, they don't know how to do this, so it's quite natural to worry about it. But once we know, we'll be fine. So it's sort of, you're worrying about it because
you don't have enough knowledge, right? You don't know.
The other thing that, like you pointed out with that performance center in Florida, is that as long as you keep talking about sleep, that perception of like, well, you know, I go to sleep at night, don't I? And so, well, No, you don't actually. What this is about is your brain takes over. When you present yourself to a sleep state, it'll take over. Now, you'll either fall asleep quickly, or it'll take 10 or 15 minutes, or you might not be able to fall asleep for quite a while. So once you've got to actually get yourself to a place where you can allow the brain to take over. When the brain takes over, you are now out of control, right? So the brain's going to basically provide a level of recovery that is predisposed against your activity during when you woke up this morning, right? So you take the complete focus away from the hours while you're asleep and focus on what are you doing throughout your day, and looking at some of the basic principles of a consistent start time to your day, because the brain loves that because of sunrise. Thinking about cycles and rhythms and patterns, which is what this whole process is about. Thinking about polyphasic sleeping, that is recovery in maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times or 6 times a day, which is completely different to how most people would look at it. And some of the little things is that when you mention light, you would certainly create the parameters for fueling up, and diet and carbs and proteins and all that sort of stuff. You would also have a hydration program around that. So if somebody wasn't taking in enough fluid, they're dehydrating. So that's not going to be good. So but the same thing is about light. And there's a lot been talked about over the last, and then I started hearing people talking about, oh, blue light's bad for you, get some blue blockers because your tech's going to keep you awake and all sorts of stuff. And I said, well, there again, there's something coming out which is counterproductive to everybody listening to it, because the blue light is amazing. It's like hydrating. So we try to put it in context. We try to put it in context that actually, I'm not making this up. Tap it in your browser. The human being on this journey on this planet, when it was more outside than in, would be exposed to this daylight. And this daylight comes at sunrise into midday and sunset, right? And inside that daylight, there is this blue light energy wave. Now that blue light energy wave piles its way in through your eyelids into some light receptors, into a little gland in your brain called the pineal gland, and triggers a hormone called serotonin. And that tells the brain to unsuppress everything and be active, right? Happy, motivated, mood, energy, appetite, you name it, right? And that increases as you go into midday and then starts to decrease into sunrise. Now, if you're a human being outside most of the time, the daylight is around 80 to 100,000 lux. Lux is the way you measure light, lumens, right? So outside, from morning to sunset, there'd be around 80 to 100,000 lux, depending on where you are on this planet. And while you're outside, you'd be looking up and looking down, moving around, there's clouds and trees. So it's given that around, in that first 2 phases of the day, the light phases, you'd be exposed to around 10,000 lux, right? On average. So if I step outside for a few minutes, it's 70,000 lux. If I'm inside for a few hours, it could be as low as 1 or 200 or 300 lux. So suddenly you start thinking, well, if light is triggering everything as far as my brain and bodily functions and everything else, it's a bit like having one half a glass of water in the morning and another half a glass at 8 o'clock at night. You'd go nuts about that, wouldn't you? But it is sort of like, once you start to get this little relationship, wow, it's such a game changer, because whether you can be outside or not inside. I was coaching this week a footballer from Iceland. Now there's crazy light shift changes, right? And it's sort of within that process, rather than worrying about other things, you just go, so what is it? Well, I've got a consistent wake time, consistent start to my day, which is like 6:30, because I'm a morning chronotype. I'm an AM, right?
Yeah.
And I react to this process of the sun going around the planet really quickly. Loads of serotonin, I'm up and off. And do you leave your curtains open? Well, no, because I live in a country that uses daylight saving time, which they should get rid of because it's annoying. And because I coach people in countries, most of the countries I coach people in are not in daylight saving time. So you go, okay, then. So what I do is when the sun is rising, reasonably close to my 6:30 start to my day, I will use it to wake me naturally, as long as my bedroom is facing in the right direction, because not everybody's bedroom is, you know? All of these little things. When you're creating profiles of any individual, you have to find out all these little factors so you can bring things in that either compensate or minimize their impact. So if you're going to black out your room to create that darkness, to create that melatonin type of environment, then it's very difficult to wake up in the dark.
Yeah.
So a lot of people were blacking out their blinds, but then not getting
in the morning.
not reproducing that sunrise with a little daylight lamp with the curtains shut. So they're not trying to wake themselves naturally. And it's all these little things, and blue blocker glasses were being used a long, long time ago, but not to protect yourself from tech. It was basically because you can use them to create a melatonin world in the third phase of the day while you're still active.
But you've got people who wake up and use them, right? You've got people who use these all day.
Use them to stop overexposing, where we are, you know, in the UK right now. I'm sitting here, and it's going to be 10 o'clock at night before the sun disappears at some point, you know? So you kind of, it's under and overexposure and traveling and time zones and things and all that sort of stuff. And that's one place that we have just ignored like mad, but it's absolutely amazing when you get a proper relationship. And you know, where I'm talking to you now, because some of the younger athletes, because you can get quite serious about this, but some of the younger athletes, we just grab a little free light meter app onto our devices.
Yeah, I got that exact one on my phone.
Yeah. And we're sitting here, I'm right next to the window, Phil. It's a beautiful sunny afternoon. I can actually touch the glass which goes into my garden. And sat here, it's measuring 151 lux, where I'm sat here, within an arm's length against the glass. Now, you wouldn't even think glass is protective, would you?
I'm 2,500 where I'm sat.
Yeah, because yours looks quite light and bright.
Yeah, only 2,500, right?
You know, and up against the window, it goes up even further. That's within less than a meter of where I'm sitting. And if I step outside, it could be 79,000. Now, who cares? What does that mean? But what you do know is we're not making this up. If you're living in what's called a melatonin world, you're still active, you're probably still successful, but you are a shadow of who you could be, right? Because you haven't got that rhythm. And the reason why it's important is because that's the natural rhythm of these hormones being produced, of suppressing and unsuppressing. And if you get out of sync with that, your brain constantly is adapting, right? That's what it does. It just adapts to your behavior. And while it's constantly adapting, it means when you present yourself to sleep, it can only reveal what it's capable of revealing, of what you've done with it throughout the day. And there's a long subject in there about lots of little things. And also, but the principle is, the more you synchronize with a consistent start to your day, you know, chop your day up into 90-minute cycles, which we might touch on, I don't know, but you chop your day up, think about the 4 phases, stop thinking about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, because those are just things we've put on the circadian rhythms, and stop thinking about this is how am I going to sleep on Sunday or how am I going to sleep on Saturday. This just rolls every day. And the more you get synchronized with that process, in very simple terms, suddenly things start to happen that you never experienced before, whether it's energy levels, the ability to cope with stressful situations, and also things like, you know, coaches and mentors and friends and colleagues Once you start finding these little things out, you say, well, hey, Phil, wouldn't it be better if we did this type of exercise first thing in the morning because I'm a nighttime chronotype, and maybe do those things like that a little bit later in the day? Or if we can't do that, maybe I need to do something before I come and see you to make sure I'm fully awake rather than just turning up with a gym bag. So it's kind of like, you don't have to change the world, but with your knowledge, you could certainly protect yourself and take more advantage of it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because obviously we're talking to you about sleep, but you've actually talked about the morning, right? Yep. Is that how critical that is to, and I used to talk to, loads of people about the routine thing, right? He's getting up at the same time. And I used to go back to when I was, when I was younger and, you used to go out on a weekend party or whatever it might be. And I used to explain the fact that, people get up on a Monday morning feeling rough as hell because theoretically they're in a different time zone, right? Because they've gone to bed later and they've got up later and then they've gone to bed later. So, you wake up on a Monday morning, theoretically you're in New York or somewhere like that. Yeah. So you wake up, you're rough as hell, nothing functions, you don't want to get out of bed, you can't open your eyes, blah, blah, blah. And, I said about the light meter there, if I get up now when it's dark in the morning, if I come downstairs, if I sit down at my desk and start working, I know that I'm not exposed to enough light. So I have two lights that are there for that purpose, is that I know I'll get hit with 10,000 plus lumens for, the first 30 or 40 minutes of my day, very comfortably. But obviously you don't have that opportunity when it's dark in the morning, right? So part of that routine thing that you're talking about is, if you get in this routine in the morning, therefore the nighttime, and I'm just suggesting here that what you're saying is the nighttime then also starts to almost look after itself, right? Yeah. Provided, again, you follow the same kind of rules, but in reverse, the other way around, right? You let the brain do its job.
Yeah, and it's kind of, it's not my expertise, but I spend a lot of time around sports science, nutritionists, psychologists, you name it. So by default, I get take it all in. And it's kind of the other way to sort of look at it, and this is why it's not about sleep in that sense, is that there is an external clock that doesn't have weekends, that doesn't have days off, that doesn't have Mondays or Tuesdays or Wednesdays. It is simply a process of the sun rolling around the planet. Now, that affects everything on this planet, but human beings are the only section of that world that can move away from it.
Yeah, that we're kind of anti it, aren't we?
We
talk about
everything else is fixed. Yep. Plants and birds and other mammals, animals, everything, tides, you name it, seasons. It's all fixed, right? But human beings go, oh, we'll invent electric light. Don't think of the consequences. Human beings invented daylight saving time in the war years. Phil, and they still haven't changed it. Right? This was not a human performance shift. This was created in some bad years, and it's still here today. What's that about? We create technology, we create social media, we create 24/7, and we do even have those open discussions that we, some of these things are really fantastic, but they're also a bit scary, and we're in a bit of an experiment. So it's like, when you look at all those things, there's nothing changed here. So when you're actually going through that particular process and thought, the best place is an external clock. You've got an internal clock in your hypothalamus of your brain. You've got a little clock in every single cell, organ, muscle, joint in your body. Yep. And it's kind of like, if it's 3 p.m. outside, it should be 3 p.m. in here and 3 p.m. everywhere else, right? But if you're constantly asking your brain to adjust and adapt, whether it's light diminished like this or whatever, then all it does is that it might be 3 p.m. out there, but it could be 8:30 up here and 6 o'clock down. So what it is like, what happens is that once you get a little bit synchronized, all he's talking about is light. It's not that difficult, is it? Yeah. That's just one little bit. Is once you get there, suddenly you realize, like, oh, I had a nice meal. I feel like I've digested it really well. And I feel I could eat something more a little bit later. I want to take that drink. I want to eat some freshly cooked food. I feel energized. I feel a smile. So I ring my friend, or I like to go to the gym instead of making an excuse not to. What happens is, without you even knowing it, suddenly you become a person who's more productive, seems to be happier, seems to be achieve, you know, either quite significant changes in that, or maybe just a few seconds, you know, within the areas of sport. And that's why there's so much more stuff coming out that we should be the healthiest, fittest, most knowledge human population ever to walk this planet. Why is there such a growing concern about completely the opposite? So I know in your world, as high performance and everything else, you do everything you can, but we cannot ignore that there's a significant increase in lots of different areas. And we kind of think it's not necessarily about we don't sleep well. It's about that we just don't have a recovery approach that actually works.
Yeah, we
And
do.
we need to sort that out.
Yeah, it's almost like we talk about it. You know, we talk about circadian rhythm a lot. I write about it a lot about chronotype and all these different things. And obviously, what we're talking about here is almost the fact that the human beings ignore the foundations, right? You know, we're talking about performance, and we're talking about performance in its wider narrative, right? We want to be able to wake up in the morning and function, work, and do whatever we choose to do in the morning, whether it's activity, or whether it's sitting down on a computer and doing things and being productive, or it's being happy and spending time with people, whatever it might be, you know, all their own individual perceptions of performance, right? You know, and that wider performance narrative that human beings want. But we don't base anything on foundations. So we're going, right, hold on. So what we're going to do is we're going to build our entire day on nothing. You know, we don't have a foundation of how a day looks or how a day is structured and blah, blah, blah. And obviously we're getting it all skewed, like you said, with daylight savings. I mean, we have a 2-year-old, and you know what I'm going to tell you here. Yeah. And you know what I'm going to tell you here, right? It's, you know, daylight savings last week, all of a sudden, boom, everything's out of sync, you know, because she has a routine, you know, and that routine is based around, again, you know, in the morning, she gets up, she comes downstairs. We have a, you know, fortunately our living room, the way our house faces, we've got sunlight comes through, beams through into our, you know, yeah. So my first thing at this time of year is I don't work in my office, because my office is at the other side of the house. So what I do is I sit at the kitchen table, which is at the other end of the house, which means that all I've got is I've got these big glass windows that beam sun down on me from the second I wake. Whereas getting into winter, it's like I come in here and I turn the lights on because it's, you know, so are we, I guess my question's going here is that, are we wrong to, because you're almost saying we should kind of go against this structure, this Monday to Friday structure, but ultimately we can't. So are we right to almost synthetically manipulate that, which is kind of what I'm doing, right? I'm going, look,
it is what you're doing.
I'm getting up at, you know, 5 a.m. And if I'm getting up at 5 a.m. and the sun's out, brilliant. If I'm getting up at 5 a.m. and the sun's not out, I'm going to synthetically create the fact it's out.
Yes. That's exactly it. It's exactly it. And it's always really, it's quite, it's so interesting for me, as you can imagine, Phil, that, you know, back in the 90s and early, you couldn't even have a conversation like this because it's like sci-fi stuff, you know? There's not brick walls everywhere.
Like
chronotype?
Lumens, chronotypes? What are you going on about?
Yeah, I have no idea, right? But
guys,
so, you know, there are certain areas of the public where it is moving, and what you've got, you are now setting the new standards, aren't you? Because it's exactly what you said. You can't just, the ideal would be to get rid of daylight savings time. The ideal would be have every room in your house got the sunlight in the morning and got it naturally. Of course it is, but you have to synthetically create that not only for your 2-year-old, but for yourself, her journey and your journey. And that's one little area, isn't it, that you're looking at. And it is a bit like that. It's there you are. This is where you live. This is the postcode where you are. These are the dynamics around you, socially, occupationally, partners, kids, friends, everything else. The house, does your bedroom face this way? Does your bedroom face? But we don't go into these things with recovery knowledge, do we? Right? You might look at a house and go, well, where am I going to put my gym? Or you don't go in.
Nick, my wife looks at it as going, how long are we going to get sun for sunbathing?
Exactly. So they go, is the garden south facing? Is it like that? The bedroom's on the other side. So, you know, who cares? It's a bedroom, you know? So we kind of wander into all of these little things without this recovery radar going on in our heads. And so we're always constantly adapting and making it up. But if you just step back and go, just like when you profile any individual, you don't just go, how well do you sleep? How many hours do you get? And all those nonsense questions. We start looking at, show me around your house, Phil. Show me your partner. Show me your
routines, right?
Talk to me about you. Give me your profile. Are you one of these hyperactive, crazy guys, or are you one of these chilled out, or are you a worrier? Are you a stressor? All of these factors. You've got gender in there as well, and it's sort of, and where you live, and all of these factors, and you bring all of that together, and you use a technique and go into there, which is a formulated technique that I created over the years, but it just creates a framework, and then you go, Phil, easy. That's great. First thing there. When you move to there, create the light. Bang, bang, bang. So when I go into, I've designed quite a number of, not specifically me, but I've been part of the consultation team when we're designing training facilities. Places like Manchester City CFA up in Manchester, state-of-the-art place. And other clubs have done it now. Caught Up, Tottenham, Liverpool, Leicester have just recently done it. Brighton Hove Albion, we've got an amazing state-of-the-art place. But the thing is about this, the one particular city, it was, of course it is about the performance, but what it was is a recovery centre, right? Everything in there is about preparing for games, recovering from games, all the things that are going on within that environment. And so, even the lighting, there's lots of places these days, if you've got the money, there's no bulbs or lamps or anything. You've got a circadian lighting system. It's like you have in a lot of posh homes with turn your heating on and on your app and all this sort of stuff. So literally, if you're in that training centre or within 2 meters of it, you are actually being affected by these subtle light changes while you're actually walking around doing nothing. So it's a wonderful little journey when you get on it. And it's just that little thing, just reminding yourself that I can call you Phil, but I could call you Nick, Dave, Susan, Samantha, wherever I want. You're a human brain with bodily functions, and these things are all in place. And as long as you just keep, which is what you're doing, is just keep yourself in more of a synchronized relationship, as if all of these other things weren't there, then although you've got schedules, although you've got Mondays and Fridays, although you've got things to deal with, they all seem to have so much less impact on you, and you seem to be able to cope with them much better, and you seem to be a much happier person for it. That's when you stop worrying about sleep. And when you stop worrying about sleep, the brain just goes, thank you for today, Phil. You fall into sleep state, takes you in, whacks you through these stages, gives you everything you want. You wake up, cool, light, waking you up, loves it. Consistent start to the day, loves it. Let's go and do that again. And that's the place where, unfortunately, the vast majority are just not even close.
It's funny, isn't it? Your world very different to, not really my world now, but my world when I was a coach, right, is that we played with the physiology that had massive variables, right? Is that we played with mechanics, we played with, fiber types, we played with, limb lengths, we played with tendons, ligaments, blah, blah, blah. All these variables where you had to treat everybody almost very differently, right? Whereas when we get to the deeper level of what you're talking about and where your skill set lies, is that we're talking about the things that aren't variables. We're talking about the things that are consistent, right? And like you said, you can call anybody what they want, hormonally.
Good point. Not actually thought about it in exactly that way, Phil. That's a great point.
And it you've got a controllable there. Whereas, which if you can build foundations around a controllable, if everybody looked the same and everybody physiologically was the same, I'd be the best coach in the world. you know, because all I had to do was learn a bunch of routine things that are uniform, that are the same for everybody, and it just fits, it just works, right? But then you've got to take all that context that you just talked about before. You've got to consider, you know, their family. You've got to consider what way the house is facing. You've got to consider. So there are considerations. There is a skill. There is an art to, you know, mastering that and getting it right. Because, like anything, you know, people's houses face different ways. People are in different time zones. People are, you know, have different routines. You know, people who work night shifts, right? That's always a dilemma, right? People always ask me, you know, how do I eat as someone who eats night shifts? I said, you eat breakfast when you wake up, and you eat throughout the day like you do normally, you know, but it just so happens there's no daylight, you know, and it's, you know, and it's that thing. And I always remember there was
lots and lots of hospital workers, frontline workers, things like that, and also hospital trusts and things like that. And they sort of go, I was listening to this thing that you did this webinar workshop, and I happened to be part of it. And he said, you know, I suddenly started grabbing little short 2 or 3 minute little CRPs because they're there, but I didn't realize they were there. So it's just quickly look out a window for a couple of minutes and just helping the brain.
Just for the listeners that don't get what your abbreviation was there, CRPs.
Yeah, controlled recovery periods. They're opposite to naps. Naps are things that happen when you're over fatigued, you haven't got a defined approach, so the brain just kicks in and puts you asleep, you know, on the sofa in front of the telly or behind the wheel of a car on a motorway, which is nuts. These are controlled recovery periods because they are little things that what we've done is back in the early mid-90s, no phones for me, right? No phone. International sales and marketing director, traveling around the world. Now, what you can reflect on just that short period of time, there was loads of recovery breaks for. They weren't planned for, they were just there. So this monophasic sleep approach could exist because there was loads of little breaks. You know, I could write as much as I wanted down on my notepad, but it didn't go anywhere. It just stayed there in my notepad. And by the time I'd even got to another destination, I probably thought, nah, I ain't going to do that now.
Yeah.
Right? There's just loads of them. So what we, it's that little journey with the brain. So, you know, that's really what it is. You know, I'm just looking out the window right now while I'm talking to you, you know, and it's just like, you get it totally subconsciously that if you see a window, me and Phil go and talk next to the window, not over there, because we constantly get attracted to little places, which is all about us being, you know, great. And little CRPs, I know that if I focus my attention on something, the brain is just processing that and creating the relevant emotions. If I just shift it and look outside the garden and the trees and everything else not there, or anything else I can think of, just for a couple of minutes, it start processing that and changes it. So it's sort of like, would you like a couple of minutes? Yeah, just have a couple of minutes. Back on. Light, back on. Yeah. Would you like a little 30-minute cycle? Yeah, because in that polyphasic approach, 5 90-minute cycles is 7.5 hours, and 90-minute cycles is the way you track it.
Like exercise, right?
And all that sort of stuff. And it sort of all starts to make sense. You just go, well, we talk about meditation, mindfulness. They're literally just, whether it's 2 minutes every 90 minutes, it's the first 60, 90 minutes of your day, which is recovery from sleep to become active again. So that's a recovery period, fueling up, hydrating, mental challenges. That's not about an act, that's a recovery period, but you're active. So it's just, you know what I mean? It sort of starts to change your concept of sleep is doing nothing in a sleep state. This is about active recovery that actually promotes that one bit of being in a sleep state, comfortable, not worrying about it, and your brain's happy with it. And it sounds so simple to say because it actually is. It's not that difficult to do it.
It's very similar to an injury, right?
I redefined it. So, you know, it's definitely going to be simple and effective if I designed it, I can tell you.
You know, it's like an injury, right? Is that when people have an injury, right? Typically, the point where the pain is, that isn't where the injury is, right? And this is like sleep, right? The point where the problem is typically isn't where the issue people think it is, because they think I've got a problem with sleep, therefore I've got to address my sleep. Well, no, you don't. You actually have to address a bunch of other stuff, right?
Yeah. I think the obvious things is that, like, catching up on sleep, naps and all that sort of stuff, and not getting enough sleep, and how can I adjust it? Well, I'll listen to some whale noises or binaural beats, or I'll get some smells, or I've got this tracker app that starts playing music for so long and then it goes off, and then I've got this tracker that as soon as it notices I'm in a light sleep state, that's going to wake me up. And so hang on a minute, are you ever going to be in a position where you decide that you're not going to get on that bike and train today, if you're a professional cyclist or whatever it might be, because you had a bad night's sleep, or you woke up a few times? It's never going to happen. What you need to know is you're never going to stop yourself getting on the bike, but what you need to do is to make sure that when you're going to these things, you are at your best. And if you've come out of something a bit difficult, how do you repair that before you do these things? So there's already a medical term for this sort of guessing game of sleep trackers, which nobody's against this in the slightest, but it just needs to keep moving on. Education plus also technology is the fact that orthosomnia is the anxiety and stress, the increased anxiety and stress, that people wake up in the morning and go, I only got 5% deep sleep and 6.25 hours. What are you going to do that? Not take the kids to school? Are you going to not fly a plane? Are you not going to go to be a surgeon? Are you not going to go and open up the school as a teacher? What does this mean? So it's kind of, we do use trackers and things like that every now and again. We use them in all sorts of other areas, Phil. Of course we do. You can't measure it. You don't do it in sport. But in this particular area, it's very intrusive. Sometimes that period when you're in that sort of nocturnal area, there's lots of things humans tend to want to do with that period. You mentioned chronotypes. Some might want to be up at 1 o'clock in the morning, but that will show up and the coach will go, what are you doing up at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning? Well, I'm a PMer, get a life, And then you see, well, what was all that heart rate activity about 3 o'clock in the morning? Hello, I've got a sexy wife. Give me a break. You know what I mean? And it's sort of like, I woke up and I felt great. So I thought, well, I'll listen to some music and read some books and make some breakfast. And why were you awake at 4 o'clock in the morning? Because if you ever looked into the circadian rhythms, the deep sleep comes between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Remember, this is not nighttime. This is just the sun on its way back. That's why it's called 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. It's not 2 o'clock at night. The sun is already coming back to wake us up. So it wasn't that long ago where people would wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, completely feel wide awake because they're part of that multi-phasing, and become active for a period of time. Right? The Victorians were doing it. So it's kind of like tracking this thing without the knowledge of all these other factors. And I was just jumping on a few quick ones there. Creates even more stress and anxiety than it should do. So it's a tricky little area where the world's dive bombing into sleep as the big new thing, whether it's performance or fear or dementia or Parkinson's or obesity or suicide or mental health and well-being and all of that sort of stuff has been accentuated over the last 12 months. But in the same respect, it doesn't take much for an organization, and most of the organizations that I work with tend to be, because it's not all about me, Phil, I'm just part of a system, but they, cities seem to be flying along quite happily over the last few years. Consistency of performance, and I remember when I was asked to get involved with British Cycling and Team Sky back in 2008-9, that was a sort of rebirth of British Cycling, and the team there came up with the aggregation of marginal gain, so they couldn't ignore sleep. And what they clearly focused on, the equipment, every team can get hold of their best equipment, and like you said, the suits, the hats, the this, the that, the bikes, the pedals, the gears, but actually what it is the engine that we put on it, called Bradley Wiggins or Chris Hoy, the human. When we put the human into that suit with that hat on onto that bike, that's what's powering the bike. That's what is pointing the bike. And so we need to concentrate on that. So nutrition, exercise, recovery. Simple. If they don't recover well, they won't going to exercise well, they won't eat well. Their mood, their motivation won't be. And then you start talking about marginal gains, where it could be in a team pursuit on a velodrome track, one little tiny little thing, and you're gone.
Yep.
Off and up the ramps. And they might win it by the width of my finger. That's when you start to notice in that sense. So thinking in everyday life, the gains can be far more significant than sometimes in elite sport, because a lot of those things are in place anyway to a degree. We're just trying to fine tune it to get it that close to something. But when I'm doing a lot of corporate work, which is only really cropped up over the last 5 or 6 years, because I got asked to write a book, and that's in 50 languages around the world. So it exposed me to a broader, shall I get menopausal women, parents, students, pilots, doctors, trying to coach their patients, surgeons, you name it. But it's given a broader range of experience. But, I have to say that the more people like yourself and everybody else you can influence, who just suddenly go, well, if Phil does this, I should be at least doing that to help myself.
But that's also relying on experts, right? It's also relying on, it's all well and good me talking about it, but ultimately people are going to go, well, that's just what he does, and that's just what, and ultimately we still need to look at the science, and we still need to look at the data, and we still need to look at the reasons why, right? The rationale and the context, right? We've got to add context to everything. You said about, those little things, and it takes me back to, it's a place that I will always regard as one of the best gyms I've ever been to in the world. Right, years ago, but it had no lighting. It was like a nightclub. So you go into this gym to train and exercise and perform and do all these great, and equipment wise, and decor, and everything about this place was phenomenal. There's no light, and I could never understand it. And you still get it today. There's so many gyms in the UK that are, people go in to perform, right? That's what gyms are for. People go in, perform. They're trying to push the envelope with respect to physical performance, and you go in these places, they have Wunderlighters, blah blah blah, and they're this wonderful looking, looks like a nightclub, right? And they look great, but they're not fit for purpose.
No, because even with all those bright lights and all those fluorescent tubes, and it looks like it's absolutely lit up like mad. And I, they've asked me to come in and do a workshop for the members inside the gym. And first of all, I'm wandering around with my little, communal garden free light meter, never mind a scientific one. And just wandering around there and said, oh, look at that, there's a window over there. And it's like, it's off the charts. And where you're on this, here you are on your treadmill, bashing it away, doing your 15K, and it's hardly 300. Why? It's bright in it. No, that's not the right light, mate. So it's kind of like you're trying to do this 15K in melatonin land in it.
Yeah. Like
you're really having to work much harder than you should do. What? I'm mashing it here. I'm about to do my personal best. I said, your personal best is the one you know about. I'm talking about the one you don't know about.
And that's disruptive, right? So you've got somebody in this melatonin environment. They're in this dark environment. Let's say just dark environment. Let's generalize. So it's this dark environment, but they're exercising, which means their body's saying, shut down, but the physiology is going, don't wake up. And then they go home and wonder why they can't sleep. And it's, and for some people, it kind of works, right? We talked about, where you refer to them as, they refer to them as night owls and larks, isn't it? Chronotype. So you've got these people some people that go and exercise at night, and they go home and they have a wonderful night's sleep, and everything's in a nice rhythm. And then you've got other people who go, they go to their 7 o'clock exercise class or whatever it might be. And then they're wide awake till 3 a.m. Because they've just, and again, exercise studios, right? You see these classes in these atmospheric lighting, blah, 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 blah. And you're sending people to sleep. Their brains are going, shut down. And their bodies are going, no, don't do that. And you wonder why, physiologically, these people are, getting injured. Or
harder against,
Yeah.
I think it's a difficult one for some to sort of gauge that, but all you can do is still go, well, if you look at some of the key achievers, the high achievers, the elite athletes who are able to just keep smashing this and smashing this, and particularly in British cycling, Team Sky and Team Ineos and things like that, is it just, and other parts and certain footballers that just seem to just keep going, right?
Yeah.
The Ronaldos, the Lewandowskis, David Beckham could probably still play a Premiership game today, and there's these sort of types of individuals around, Bradley Wiggins, Chris Soy, Vicky Pendleton in the past, and that sort of stuff. And that's because that's what we were very much focused on. And once you start doing it, it's about one particular elite athlete, when we started the consultation process, sort of like right at the top of their game, and it sort of like wakes up, waits till the last minute, because they got 30 minutes to the training centre.
Yep.
So almost 27 minutes past 8, they're still hitting the snooze button, drag themselves out of bed, maybe grab, a drink, bottle, something. Might even think about grabbing some sort of, nutty protein bar that they'll nibble on in the car on the way there. Hit the training ground, get ready, start training. And I just went, wow. Let me just show you one of your colleagues who's clearly a morning chronotype. Now, they were up at 6 o'clock. Yep. So you had to be at the training ground for 9 o'clock and you're still in bed at 8:30. They were up at 6 o'clock, loads of light. They're fueled up. They're hydrated up. Because you get that, yeah? Their bowels are opened, so they've got rid of the waste. They've done some little mental challenges, maybe done a little walk with a dog or something, or whatever. Get in. When they get to the training ground, now they are a fully woken up, fully active, serotonin-fueled human being. And they will go out there and have a great time. And you're just pulling yourself along with it. Right?
Yep.
So to ask them to wake up earlier is just completely counterintuitive. But as soon as you trick them, if you want somebody to go and do something, don't tell them to go to do it. You take them on a little path and they find their way there, don't they? And it's in the end, you sort of got this little thing that said, well, wow, I've actually started to wake up like 6:30 and I feel okay. Yeah, well, the lamp's doing that, not you. The lamp's doing it.
Yeah, it's almost like they convince themselves that, they'll roll up to the training ground, go, I'm just not in walk.
Smoothie and some porridge this morning. And I actually, went to the toilet and opened up my bowels before I got in the car. Because normally I don't even get round to that, and probably midday when I've had lunch after training. I said, oh, that's great. So you've been asleep for 8-9 hours, right the way through till midday, thriving on waste. Well done, you. You know what I mean? Or carrying it around with you. Because if you're a Formula One driver, that's a few pounds, right? That could make you lose. That's stuck in your bum. You know what I mean? So it's kind of, I think it's just this. Are we talking about sleep, Phil? It's just a consequence of what you do from the point of wake will be your determining factor of how your brain will reveal recovery for you. That's it.
It's a consequence, right? I talk about this a lot in training, right? Is that the consequence of doing something ultimately is a positive consequence. It just happens to be the people that it's almost like the selling point, right? Sleep for you is the selling point. You got to sleep. I'm going to fix your sleep, but I'm not going to talk about your sleep. We're not going to address anything with your sleep. We're actually going to address the rest of your day, and we're going to look at the things that precede it. So we're going to look at the preparation, which starts first thing in the morning, and we're going to go bump, 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 and we're going to look at your environment. We're going to look at your stress, and you got all these different things, and obviously there's strategies, right? There's tons of strategies. Things like journaling, right? Is that something when you've got people who are busy in their heads and blah blah blah? Is that something where you go, right? Before you go to bed, you're going to document, dump all this stuff, do a brain dump, and then
I think
these things that you
a long time ago there was a little sort of trick of you're just sitting in the chair, you've got everything on your to-do list, your devices, it's all there in the cloud, all sorts of. But while you're just sitting there with a pen and a pencil and some paper or a pad, and you just, while you're watching some film or something, whatever it is, and you just doodle on the page, and it might go sprouts for Christmas, it might go meeting
whatever,
some
right?
politics, right? And then you just, so anything that's still sort of floating or relevant, or maybe a bit more important than other things, you scribble it on this, but you're not trying to scribble it, it's just almost a conscious doodle of what it is. Then you put that where you leave your car keys or your house keys, because you know, even if you're half asleep, you'll go to that point to get the house keys or car keys, and then you'll pick that piece of paper up and go, all sorted, chuck it away, and off you go. So that's just a nice thing to go to sleep on, that you know that you won't leave the house, even if you've forgotten anything, because it's there where your keys are, and that's an automatic function. But I have to say that as things move on, people start to create another list. So they've got everything sorted. Now they're downloading, but they're still thinking. So they go, yeah. Oh, I'm going to do that as well. Oh, I've got another idea. Right?
It's no longer brain dump.
Even more stuff.
It's no longer brain dump. What it is a brain exercise.
Yeah.
Like you're going, right, now you got a plan for your next day. I'm like, well, no, plan for your next day in the morning if you need to, but in an evening, just get rid of the surplus. Just dump all the surplus and get rid of that. And then in the morning, that's probably when you awake and boom. And you know, I always work my best in the morning. You know,
I think the thing about it with vacant mind space periods and maybe a 30-minute cycle late afternoon to protect your evening, which I do, and it's about doing, sometimes you will go into a micro sleep, your brain will let you know that, you don't have to worry about it or try, but it's just doing something in a period of time in this multiphasic way that just completely takes you out of the moment.
Yeah.
Gives the brain a real opportunity. And I've got a number of little things I won't take up your time with right now, little tools that we would use with elite athletes when they're far away from home or they're stuck up the side of a mountain, that just creates that vacant mind space. And you're talking about these to-do lists, and I can see behind you is obviously a little bit of a more than a hobby for you, right? And when you said before, it may be a little bit of jumping down into childhood again, but I know for a fact, if I was coaching you, that one way or another, we'd start to have a conversation about those things on your wall.
Yeah.
And suddenly, you will just flick out of Phil, the performance guy, and you'll become Phil, the guy who's got all the, do you know what color that is, the whole piece? You know what, your knowledge, and suddenly, we've just had a 20-minute vacant mind space because you just went into another place. You didn't have to do it. So what you do is you find these little things that just go, tell me about that. And then after 20 minutes, you go, that's what I mean by a vacant mind space.
Well, I'll tell you a little story.
I've got you.
So just over
now,
just over that shoulder there.
Yeah.
So I do little bits of sculpting.
Yeah.
Because that is vacant mind space. So for me, I quite often on my desk I have a lump of clay, and I have something that I'm building. And what I do is, again, I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to revert you back very quickly just to talk about the last little bit, which we mentioned briefly before, which I know you're going to be able to tell us a bit more about, was the 90-minute thing, right? Yeah. So what I do is I block out my day in 90 minutes, typically. So I try and... Sorry?
Where do you get that from?
I have no idea, but I've been doing it a long time. So typically I'll block things out by about 90 minutes, because at 90 minutes, I'm starting to waver, or I'm starting to, multitask, which is a bad thing for me. I had, for the best part of 2 years, a big post-it note on my computer screen saying, stop multitasking. That was my post-it note every single day. Stop multitasking. So what I did is I used to break it up. So after 90 minutes, I either go and take a walk around or I do something. But quite often I'll pick up something and just let the creative part of my mind just run riot for 10 minutes. And literally it's 10, 15 minutes, whatever it might be. Then I go, bam, straight into my next task, which will be a work-related task. So you mentioned very briefly before about the 90 minutes. So have you got time just to expand a little bit on that?
Very, very quickly. It was just all this thing about redefining things. I happened to be, got involved with the Premiership Football Club. And that's where my journey started in elite sport. And, I had this thing in my mind about, I can't just talk about 8 hours and sleep. I've got to try and get this across. So what I knew that in a clinical environment when you're wired up and doing it, the professors and everybody would look at a 90-minute period where this thing called a polysomnograph tracks all the brainwave patterns, and it shows you what stages of sleep you're in. And some would look at 60, but most of the top people would look at 90. So 90 minutes times 5 is 7.5 hours. So there's the 8, which sounds better. So we know about the 8. So if I go 5 90-minute cycles, we can think about cycles. 5 cycles is a sleep period, right? So we can start to wander away from this 8 thing.
Yep.
And then 90 minutes just happens to be the length of a football game with a break in it, right? So it kind of made some sense that in every period of activity, there's probably a little break. So during the course of your day, 90 minutes, like you said, 90 minutes on, a couple of minutes, 3 or 4 minutes off. Then you get round to lunch and stuff, and then a little cycle here, and this is how we can play. So that's how it sort of came together. And then it enabled you to create a little planner. And when you chop the 24 hours up into 90-minute cycles from your most consistent start to your day, mine is 6:30, whatever yours is. If you start there, not sleep times, bang, you get a series of timings, 16 timings around that clock. So you've got different wake times if you have to change your occupation. So if I was 6:30 consistently most of the time, then I change time zone or get a different job. I might go back to from 6:30 to 5. I've got 11 o'clock into 6:30, which is 5 90-minute cycles, right?
Yep.
But I choose to do 12:30, which is the next cycle along, into 6:30, which is 4 cycles and 6 hours, because I put a 5th cycle, 30 minutes, at 4:30 or 5. Me making your little clay things, right?
Yep.
Or having a little microsleep. So my 5th cycle is there, which is just 30 minutes. The first 90 minutes is a recovery cycle, an active one. Little ones every 2 minutes, they all add up to helping the brain. The little period into sleep, whether it's 12 o'clock, the reason why it's 12:30, because I'm an AM and I'd normally like to go to bed at 8 o'clock. Well, I don't want to do that. I live in a 24/7 world, mate. So I want to take the pressure off my evenings. So that little 30 minutes there creates that pressure. And I'm likely to sleep all the way through. So I don't have to think about eating too late. And if something happens in the day, and it's all going right, and then Phil just says, hey, Nick, just WhatsApped you. Let's get the mountain bikes out and go for a ride tonight at 8 o'clock. And then maybe grab a bit of pizza and a cold beer afterwards. And I go, oh, I can't do that. I've got pre-sleep routine and be in bed by 11. Don't even think about it. I just go, absolutely fine, Phil. See you there. Little 30-minute cycles already in place to protect it.
Yep.
Go out and do it. I'm already thinking 12:30, not even 11. I've already made that decision as soon as you mentioned it. So you take the pressure off it. And I know that when I wake up at 6:30, start my day again, what I might do is just put another little 20-minute CRP in midday, which is the other human factor. And then a little 30-minute cycle later on, and then we're back onto it again. So what it does is it just almost subconsciously, and that's what it does. It creates 4 phases of your day. It creates subconscious timings. It creates a rolling process that really just puts you so in control because it takes away the worry.
Amazing. For those of you who are listening, this is a podcast. You can wind it back. You're probably going to need to wind that back and just go through that, what Nick just went through there, which is invaluable advice. And that worry aspect of it is probably the biggest thing that I've seen, is that when people hit these routines, right? People, they create these routines and then all of a sudden there's no flexibility. You can't, and then you get anxious about it and you get worried about it. And
we did 2. There's plenty of them, but we did 2 in the last 5 years with 2 different riders. One was riding around the coast of Ireland, which is a mountain bike race. And the other one was race across America, which is pretty much 13 plus days on a mountain bike through the night, because you're racing time, not your combine. And both these riders came to me and said, this is a real challenge. What we've got to worry about is recovery and sleep, because effectively we don't want to get off the bike for 14 days, right? And I just went, piece of cake. We'll just do it like that.
So
really? Yeah, we'll just do it like that. We go, let's just have a look at it. So you'll ride for a period of time, get to that point, jump off, curl up on the floor, opposite side to your dominant side, bang, have a 20-minute CRP, jump back on the bike, go again. Bang, do it there, bang, do it there, bang, do it there, bang, do it there. You'll be absolutely fine.
Smash.
And you'll smash it. And they just go, I was really worried about this. Now I'm not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Amazing. And obviously super relaxing, right? For an athlete or anybody doing those kind of events going, oh my God, you've just alleviated all this anxiety about how I was going to do that and how it was. And obviously those are extreme examples, right? But
they're extreme, but we just, they went away and in their training program, they just tried it. Right? Yeah. They could actually, let's try that out when we're actually not in the road. And they tried it. It's absolutely fine. You can't do it forever, because eventually it's just
it's gonna.
But it's like, wow, we were so going into this so deeply and trying to think about stuff too deeply, and the answer was just there in front of us, and it's easy. But it's the same in the walk of life. If you're under pressure, if you've got challenges, if you're worried about your sleep or whatever it is, remember that there are things there that will not kill you. They will not make you worse. They will only make you better, or they won't change things, because that just putting a few lamps around in your house could make a difference, but it's not going to damage anything. So I think the worry aspect sometimes is about people changing routines or adopting new things. And this is not like that, is it, Phil?
It's almost like layering over the top, right? It's not going to. It's almost like it's not going to do you any harm, right?
No, it can't.
So. Right. I'm going to quickly summarize. So consistent wake up time.
Yeah.
Expose yourself to a certain number of lumens. How many we're looking at, Nick?
You want an average of 10,000 lux in the first 2 phases of the day. That's morning,
so minimum,
midday, sunset.
10,000 minimum.
Average.
And you can hit that up with Lux, I think it's called, isn't it? Lux meter or something like that on an app. Awesome. And time blocking, which I think anybody who wants to know more about that, I think go back into the podcast, wind back, listen to what Nick went through because that is some invaluable advice. Nick, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you, Nick?
The easiest place is sportsleepcoach.com.
Cool.
Or just tap my name, Nick Littlehales, in a browser, and you'll find it. We've got lots of great content, videos, blogs, content, social media stuff we're always putting out, but it's always thoughtful, helpful content. On the website, you can obviously, you can access my book called Sleep, or you can listen to it on Audible. It's a very simple read. That's a good first step to start with, with some of the things we've been talking about. There's a little Audible course on the site, which is under 20 quid, so you can listen to 10 sessions like that to get you going. There's consultation services and all that sort of stuff. But, I just encourage anybody, whether it's, listening to your podcast, maybe reading my book or reading a blog or looking at a video, is just to keep on that little journey and be inspired that there's a new you out there if you want it.
Amazing, Nick. Thank you so much for your time. You're an absolute gent.
It's a pleasure.
Well, I'll speak to you again soon.
All right, mate.
Take care.